Talking baseball, baseball and the O's.
Welcome back, Birdland, to another episode of the Talkin Orioles Baseball Podcast. I am, of course, your host, Benny Becker, and as you know, I am thrilled to be sitting down here talking Baltimore Orioles baseball with all of you. Nothing more than I love than these Baltimore Orioles and to be able to talk about them on the regular. So, thrilled as always, gang, to be back here. Episode 2 of Season 2, episode 41 of the whole season. Spring has sprung, and sure has it. We have spring training games on hand, real action, real games, well, real games, if you will. But before we get into all of that, make sure you all are going to Instagram and TikTok and X and following us at our accounts, Talkin Orioles Baseball, so you get all of our Orioles content throughout the season. There's going to be a lot coming your way, gang. We are only ramping up as the season ramps up as well. Episodes every Monday and Thursday. So make sure you are aware of our new format. And make sure as well that you're sending in comments and questions. We want to add you, gang, to the show. Soon, maybe we have a hotline so you can call in, maybe even do some live calls with me on air. But until then, we need your comments and your questions so we can interact with Birdland on this show. So very exciting episode, gang. A lot of great stuff. It's always fun this time of year. Baseball just opening up. You get spring training games that, again, maybe don't mean anything when it comes to the actual results. Even the stat lines might not really mean too much. But you have these guys working through their process, ramping up as well for the season, which is very exciting to watch. And a lot of big, important things to discuss on today's show, as you see. So we're going to start nowhere else other than the first 2 spring training games. Today's was rained out against the Braves. We were supposed to have a third one to talk about, but we'll start with the 2 and kind of run through it real quick. It started off in game 1, and I'll say this before we even get to the game. How beautiful was it since the Orioles were at home? They got to wear their actual home whites. I love when they do that. They don't wear the spring training jerseys. They wear the real home whites. I think they only do it for that first game, but it's awesome to see. It makes you really feel like the season is here, and it's not just these exhibition games. So we were playing the Pirates. Didn't have to go against Skeens or Jones. A lot of guys in this first game, as far as real stars and major leaguers go, pretty much don't play. You got some guys spread throughout the lineups and maybe a pitcher here or there. But ultimately, especially early on, you're getting a lot of these prospects and fringe players, even at best, fringe players playing. So we ended up dropping the first game to the Pirates 10-5. We did give up 4 in the 9th, though, so it was a much closer game for 8 innings than it seems like the final score indicates, which ultimately, again, the final score isn't really important. But it's nice to see you competing in these games through almost the entirety of it. And there's really not much to report on this first game. Suarez started off the game. That's no indication necessarily of Suarez starting even in the rotation this season, let alone starting opening day. I don't think there's a chance he starts opening day. I'd say there's a very slim chance he starts in the rotation. But I think it's a big indication that Orioles most likely are going to start Suarez on the roster, right? As kind of the long man, if you need an extra starter, which usually in the beginning you don't. But if you did, Suarez would already be up to be that guy, fill that role. I think him just starting this first spring training game kind of indicated where the Orioles are at. You know what I mean? Where the front office brass and the coaching staff expect Albert Suarez on this roster, which is a big sign, honestly, because as far as pitchers are concerned, I could make the argument where Suarez is maybe the bottom and last guy making this team, if not bottom 3 of the last 3 guys as far as pitchers go to make this roster. And he didn't really do himself any favors. Again, stat lines are a little finicky. Okay, obviously you want to see positive stat lines, but just because Suarez didn't really have a great day doesn't really mean much. He went 1 2/3, giving up 3 hits, 2 walks, 2 earned runs. Wasn't necessarily pretty, but I will say I still think that he has to have a lot more performances like that to really put his roster spot in jeopardy. That's where I'm at. That's where I'm feeling. You never quite know, especially when it comes to a guy like Albert Suarez. But I feel pretty confident. And again, the Orioles giving him that start, I think sends that early message that he's at least the favorite, if not outright favorite, to land on this club, leaving the team, or leaving camp, excuse me. We also saw Keegan Aiken was one of the other pitchers that will be on this major league team more than likely. And he didn't really have a great outing either. 1 earned run in 1 inning, but he did get 2 strikeouts, which is something we've seen from Keegan Aiken in the regular season and even postseason, I believe, when he's pitched in there. Really, the past 2 years, Keegan Aiken has taken that step into turning himself into a bit of a strikeout pitcher. When I feel like earlier in his career, he was a little more maybe finesse and ground ball pitcher rather than a strikeout guy. So, again, doesn't really mean much. As far as the actual stars on the team go, in the lineup, Gunnar went 0 for 2, Mullins 0 for 1 with a walk, O'Hearn 0 for 2, Holiday 0 for 2. We did see some positives, though, right? That was the negatives. And again, an 0 for 2 day, especially in the first game of spring training, but in general in spring training, doesn't really matter too much. It's more about the process. It's more about getting your timing back, especially for these hitters. It seems like early on the pitchers have the upper hand usually rather than the hitters. Because facing live BP and taking batting practice isn't ever going to equate to in-game speed, in-game situations, in-game feel. So all those guys went hitless. Not necessarily what you want to see, but not a problem. We did have some success. Westy went 1 for 2. Mountie 1 for 1 with a walk. Gary Sanchez, the new Gary Sanchez, 1 for 1 with a walk. Laureano, again, another new guy, 1 for 2 with an RBI single. Carlson, 0 for 1, but also a sac fly RBI, which was nice. Then when you get a little into the prospects and the fringe guys, we didn't see a ton out of necessarily the bigger names, but we saw some decent stuff from kind of the lower guys. So Coby Mayo went 0 for 3. Again, not what you want to see, especially from a young kid who's struggled. But we will talk more about Mayo in a little bit. He's going to be our first topic outside of these 2 games. Then you have Enrique Bradfield, also 0 for 3. He's certainly a little bit more ways out than Mayo, but you'd like to see him at least, find some holes and use his speed, because when he gets on, he's certainly a threat. He has that 80 grade speed, and when we talk grades, remember in baseball, it's 20 through 80. So if you have an 80 grade speed, that's as good as it gets, gang. Judd Fabian, 0 for 1, but did draw a walk. Dylan Beavers, who personally reminds me a lot of Kyle Stowers when I watch him, gang. Maybe that's just me. Their mannerisms at the plate, their stance, their swing, it all seems very similar. In fact, when I saw Beavers when the on deck circle before he came up, for a second I thought it was Kyle Stowers. Like my brain was like, oh, Stowers is next. Then I had to do the process of being like, Stowers don't play for us anymore. He's in Miami. Anyway, Beavers goes 1 for 2. Daz Cameron, son of former MLB Mike Cameron, went 1 for 2 as well. Now, Cameron is certainly a fringe guy. It's a guy we'll touch on slightly later in this episode. I don't see much of a path for him on this roster, like a lot of these fringe players. But listen, you put up numbers, you put up stats, you can at the very least maybe keep yourselves in the good graces of the organization. And even if you go to the minors to start, you might be that next man called up if they like you a lot. So that was really game one. Game two was a little more fun from the Orioles' perspective. It was a game against the Phillies, which was kind of fun for me, as you know that I live right outside of Philadelphia. And it was a 7-3 win for the Orioles. A little more dominating feel from the Orioles also, as they kind of, like I said, dominated most of that game. They had control for the majority of that game as they took the lead early, but we'll get to how they got that. Really, the biggest takeaway was Cade Povich, who started that game. 2 innings pitched, didn't allow a ball out of the infield. Only runner reached on an error. So two innings, no hits, no walks, no runs, 1 strikeout. But listen, again, he's not that strikeout type pitcher. He'll get his Ks here and there. And I believe he struck out Nick Castellanos. So certainly he struck out a legitimate major league hitter, which is a positive sign. But you just love to see that from Povich, who we've heard a lot of great stuff about, and we're going to talk a lot of good stuff about later this episode. Really, another name we're going to touch on in a little is our next guy we're going to touch on in this game, which is Rodolfo Martinez. And you might say, who? Put it this way. You're either saying, who? Or you're saying, I can't stop hearing about this guy. He's one of these gems, hidden gems, diamond in the roughs that we seem to have found yet again. And you know Mike Elias and this front office has done it time and time again. Again, we're going to touch on him shortly, so I'm not going to dig too much into it. But in that game 2, his first appearance in a game for the Orioles, 1 inning, 1 earned run, 1 hit, 1 walk. The earned run was on a home run. It wasn't pretty by any means, and certainly control was an issue. I believe at one point it was like 15 of his 21 pitches were balls. Obviously, that needs to improve if he's ever going to see the field for the Orioles in any meaningful game. But the stuff is clearly there. The stuff is absolutely there. And the the home run was on a fastball that he really just piped down the middle. But it was a hard fastball. Like, even if you're sitting on that, you might not get to it. And if you get to it, you might not square it up. In that game, yeah, they got to it and squared it up. That'll happen. Especially when a guy is struggling with control as much as Martinez was yesterday. But, again, you look at the positives, you look at the stuff, you look at the rave reviews. And that's, again, what we'll touch on in a little bit. Brandon Young, who was last year's Orioles minor league pitcher of the year, looked great in that Phillies game. 2 innings pitched, 2 hits, 2 Ks, no runs. He's a guy that you want to talk fringe guys. You want to talk guys that maybe if they don't make the roster out of camp, might be the first guy up. Brandon Young, I'm telling you, don't forget that name because he will be pitching for the Orioles this year with the big club, assuming health and everything like that. Now, Colton Cowser, he got on base twice, put it that way. But he got hit by pitches both times. Now, neither time was an issue. In fact, the second time he got hit was actually by former teammate Nick Vespi. But it's just one of these things where you hate to see any of your real guys getting hit by pitches in spring training. Now, we got lucky. It wasn't like he caught it on the hand or anything. So, you're able to exhale. But at first, it don't feel good. When you see he's getting hit, you're like, oh, God. Oh, no. Don't do that to me. Heston Kjerstad, Silent J, 0 for 3, like a lot of these young Orioles prospects went. Coby Mayo, 1 for 3 with 2 RBIs. That was actually how they took the lead in the first inning. And listen, it was on a ground ball through the infield. It's not a negative. I'm not making a negative thing about it. But it just makes me wonder if we're really going to get the full potential of Coby Mayo in the package we have Coby Mayo now. And again, that's going to be our first topic outside of these games. Then you have Sam Basallo, or Basallo. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it, Samuel Basallo. My dumb mind just wants to keep saying Basallo. So, I'll probably go back and forth on it, but I'm going to do my best to say Basallo. He went 1 for 3. And again, another guy we're going to touch on later this episode. The amazingly talented 20-year-old catching prospect, Sam Basallo. I can't say enough about this kid, and we got a lot more to say about him, so we're just going to move on for the moment. Outside of that, Emmanuel Rivera had himself a decent game. 1 for 2, 2 runs, 2 RBIs, and a home run in the first game against the Pirates. 1 for 3 with another RBI in the second game against the Phillies. He's another fringe guy that clearly the Orioles like a bit. They brought him in last year, didn't maybe expect much from him, and he outperformed definitely what us fans expected. And I would even say what the front office and coaching staff expected when they brought up Rivera. That was kind of the time where we were all banged up, and he had a couple magic moments for us. Certainly, he seems like he's on the outside looking in. But if, some continued good performances, you keep putting up runs, you keep putting up RBIs, you keep having these successful games, who knows? Who knows? Emmanuel Rivera might be able to find himself on this roster at some point. But again, I just don't know. That's a topic, though, again, just like everything I'm mentioning, we are going to go back to at some point in this episode. We mentioned Judd Fabian and Dylan Beavers in the first game. They each had a decent second game as well. Fabian 1 for 1 with a walk and a run. Beavers 1 for 1 with a walk and a run. I like these two young outfielders. I know maybe they don't have the highest ceiling. Certainly Heston Kjerstad and Colton Cowser have more pub behind them as far as outfield prospects on those game-changing players. But I think they both look like guys that can compete at a major league level and help this club, if not this year, certainly in the years moving forward, if nothing more, as solid depth, right? So when we looked at like Ramon Laureano and Dylan Carlson, right, we talked about how at the very least, they are competent, professional, major league backup outfielders, right? They are the type of guys when you're rounding out your outfield with depth, those are the type of guys you're confident can play in the major leagues. It's looking like Fabian and Beavers might both, at the very least, be able to accomplish that. And I just have this feeling, especially for Beavers, that he's the guy that can maybe take that next step and at the very least be a starter, an outfield starter for us at some point in like a year or two. We'll see. See how it all pans out, but I'm certainly liking both of them at the moment. And then the last guy I'm going to mention, just because of how good his performance was Vamil Machine. I mean, great last name. Certainly, you might be like, I don't really even know that name. He must be young. He's not. He's already in his 30s, I believe 31. So certainly not a guy that's young in the game. But again, not necessarily at an age where he's already past his prime, not at an age where it's crazy that he could kind of have it click and take that next step. I know Mike Elias has really liked him and has talked positively on Machine. He had a 3-for-3 day with 2 RBIs and was a triple short of the cycle. He was actually in the Phillies organization for a little too, so it was against his former organization. And I don't think Machine has much of a chance, if any, to stick on this major league roster, like a lot of these guys coming out of camp. But if the Orioles keep him in the system, who knows? Who knows? We might be able to see him at some point this season, and maybe he provides a Emmanuel Rivera type spark when his time comes. That's all I'm thinking. So those were the 2 games to start spring training off. Again, if nothing more, I just love that baseball is back, gang. I just love being able to turn on the TV and see these spring training games happening. I wish Masson put out all of the spring training games, but I know that doesn't happen. I know we're not getting that. So certainly we're going to miss being able to watch some of these games because I'm not in Sarasota, gang. I'm not down in Florida. Maybe one day. but not today. All right? So, moving on from those games, again, there's only so much you can take from them, let alone learn from them. And we have a lot of important topics to cover. The first one is titled Herky Jerky Mayo. Don't sound too appetizing. And it makes me worry. I can't help but feel that we're not going to get the full potential of Coby Mayo if his swing is too herky-jerky. And listen, I'm not an expert. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm an expert. I like to think that I have an educated mind on some of this stuff. But if the Orioles front office and coaching staff and developmental staff hasn't made him change this kind of herky-jerky type thing that he does at the plate, maybe they don't view it as an issue. Maybe the analytics say it's not an issue. Maybe if you actually break it down frame by frame, he gets himself into a great point in his swing every time. And really does have everything under him and is able to transfer the weight and explode off that baseball. Right? These are things that I think they look at. So, it could be because they don't agree with me, they don't see an issue. But it also could be because he's had success at every level doing that. They don't want to change it until they have to. So it could be both things, right? And it just looks like there's a hitch in his swing. I feel like Clint Eastwood in Trouble with the Curve. It just looks like this is a big, powerful, strong kid. You want to get that bat in the plane and be able to explode through that baseball. And kind of how he is swinging, it looks like he's just behind and he almost has to slap at it. Which if he had Jackson Holliday's speed or Enrique Bradfield's speed, I'd be less worried about it. But this is a kid with one of the best power profiles of any prospect in baseball. That's a tongue twister. But with any of these prospects in baseball, he's up there with the best power hitting prospects. And this is a guy that seems like he doesn't have everything locked and loaded to explode through. It's almost like if I could switch his swing and Jackson Holliday's swing, I feel like they would both shoot through the roof. But it seems like Holliday is just ingrained with this power swing, which is great. And I don't want to change that yet for him. But we saw last year how that might mean that he's making less contact than he should. And if he's making less contact than he should, then he's not putting the ball in play and he's not utilizing his speed. Whereas Coby Mayo seems like he's able to put the ball in play, but maybe just can't get all his power behind it and explode through that baseball. I'm not sure. But I do know that while the chance of him making the team is slim, I believe he will at least start the season back in the minors and be able to tweak with these things. Being in a major league camp, if you are successful, gives you stuff to work on. But if you're not successful, gives you even more to work on. And while we just mentioned Jackson Holliday, remember when Holliday got sent back down to the minors last year and struggled a bit? And he talked about having to retool some things, specifically with his high leg kick. And then he went to more of even a toe tap, like a small leg kick or a toe tap, just eliminating especially how high it was, but at times even in general eliminating it at all. And I can't help but feel that if Coby Mayo doesn't have the success in spring training this year that we all hope he does, then maybe when he starts the year in the minors, that's what they're tweaking a bit. finding a way to get his hands back quicker. Because it does seem like, again, I'm not prolific in analyzing baseball swings for as much of this game as I've watched. It just seems like there's a hitch there, guys. And I can't help but worry that that's going to hinder what Coby Mayo we wind up getting. I'm just being realistic, gang. I know it might sound a little pessimistic, and you know that's not where I want to rely on, but I can't help but feel like it's possible. Sorry, I put my can in wrong. Anyway, so the next topic is, again, going to make you either say who or, again, I hear about this guy. Rodolfo Martinez, 30-year-old journeyman, has just impressed in camp so far. Now, he had a tough debut, as we talked about, but that doesn't necessarily matter. A tough first outing, and it wasn't even horrible. It wasn't terrible. But absolutely, he's going to continue to get more chances as this spring training goes. Because he's a live arm, gang. Fastball lives at 100 miles an hour, 100, 102. He says he can top out at 104. Has a sinker in the mid-90s. A lot of good stuff, and frankly, fits the profile that the Orioles have kind of looked for in these relievers that they've had great success in the past couple years. Now, he hasn't pitched in affiliated ball since 2019. He was signed by the Giants out of the DR in 2013. Pitched for them for 6 years. COVID season, teams had to chop down some guys, ended up getting left off rosters. And he topped out at AAA Sacramento for the Giants, but he only pitched 1 inning there. He didn't have a ton of success in AA, but he had a lot of success in single A. Now, given that was a long time ago. Since then, he's pitched in the Dominican Republic, Japan, Mexico for the past few years. But frankly, he could be next in line for as far as like the diamond in the rough that the Orioles seem to find. And it usually comes in these bullpen arms, whether it be Albert Suarez, Ynier Cano, Cianel Perez, or even Felix Bautista. Really, like, there's a long history in just the past few years of the Orioles being immensely successful in finding these type of guys and getting positive results out of them. Again, I doubt he breaks camp with the team. But he signed with the Orioles because of the opportunity that was there for him. Not necessarily in the opportunity from day one, but the opportunity that he felt he could wind up on this club helping them win games. So at some point, I assume we are going to see him in Baltimore pitching for these Orioles. And hopefully, they're able to get him to throw more strikes than he did yesterday, get him a little more controlled, and figure out a way to let that live arm play in the majors, gang. Again, he's going to have a lot more chances this spring. And hopefully, again, I don't know his contract necessarily. I know he's a non-roster invitee. Sometimes you got to give these guys the option to go to another team if they don't make it out of camp. I'm not sure what his contract states, so I'm really hoping that even if he doesn't make camp, the Orioles are able to keep him in the organization to move forward and have him in this bullpen at some point this season. Because you know we need depth. You know you're going to need the guys. You know you're going to need the depth. You know you're going to have to replace a guy from time to time due to an injury or fatigue or whatever it may be. Don't forget the name Rodolfo Martinez. And also be thankful that he didn't take at least one of the other offers he's had, which was to go to the Yankees. It seems like this guy wants to be here. So even if he doesn't break camp with them, I think that, and he has the option to leave, I think he might take the option to stay, knowing he's going to get that chance. So now the next one is really not only a prospect and a kid that I am over the moon excited about, but I've also think that I figured out kind of like not only what his walk-up song should be, but kind of something fun for Birdland to enjoy over the next few years, aside from hopefully this kid's play. That's going to be boom, boom, boom. Let me hear you say Basallo. Basallo. I don't know. I couldn't be any more excited about that stupid little thing. That boom, boom, boom. Let me hear you say Basallo. Basallo. And if he doesn't use that for his walk-up song, he needs to. Because that is gold, gang. Gold. So anyway, we know he was in big league camp last year, but he was dealing with an elbow injury. It wasn't horrible by any means, but they really held him back from doing too much. So we didn't get a great look at him. He got his first start as a catcher in the Grapefruit League yesterday. And Hyde said, quote, he did a great job. And he did. He hit the ball very hard in 2 of his 3 plate appearances. He struck out in one of them, but he had a 105-mile-per-hour ground out, exit velocity ground out, and a single of 107.4 exit velocity. So this is a kid that hits it hard, gang. And don't forget, he's just 20 years old. 20, gang. This is a kid that's getting insane comparisons. He's being praised for his defense as well. His defense, his framing, his catching ability, which is saying a lot considering his hitting is really what his game is built on. And he's a big target back there. Brandon Hyde was talking about that because he's a big guy, man. He's a big kid. And you see him back there, and he's big. But he's also starting to get the confidence, especially defensively, because there was a point where he even challenged a pitch that was ruled a ball and was very visibly a strike after the replay. So, got a strike back for us. And just one of these things where sometimes a 20-year-old catcher, you're not trying to screw up. You're not trying to get in trouble. You're not trying to do anything. And frankly, the way baseball's set up right now, I don't think that if you didn't challenge that pitch, he would have gotten talked to about it or anything. But certainly if you're going to challenge a pitch and you're wrong, you're going to get a conversation. But clearly he was confident in what he knew to be true, which was that was a strike. He understood where the zone was. He understood where the pitch was. And he was confident to immediately just get that replay and get that strike. And it's something you really like to see. And while, again, he is not going to be somebody that really has a chance to break camp with the Orioles, you know, there's a chance at some point this season we see him. Personally, I would put my money on when the rosters expand, kind of September time of year. But even if Sanchez misses time, that doesn't necessarily force the Orioles to bring up Basallo, because they have a stable of catchers that maybe aren't as talented or as prolific as Basallo is, but certainly some guys that they like to fill that role, okay? I accidentally called Silas Ardoin Ethan Silas last episode. I knew it was a Silas, but my brain went to the Padres prospect Ethan Silas instead of first name Silas, last name Ardoin. And I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. But the Texas product, like I said, David Banuelos, who I believe we saw a little last year, get his major league debut for a few games. That was probably, I would assume, when James McCann went down with the whole concussion face thing. You know what I mean? Like getting plunked in the face, dead square in the nose. And don't forget Maverick Hanley. All these guys, I think, would get called up if there was an injury before they would force Basallo up there. But that isn't a guarantee. Like, if Basallo is doing everything he needs to do and showing everything he needs to in AAA, I think the Orioles would consider pulling that trigger. I also don't want to leave out, I was going to write his name down. I didn't. There's this one kid who's also a catching prospect, played first base a little in that Phillies game for the Orioles, that just has a great look to him. Oh, Creed Willems. Creed Willems, great longer hair, Texas kid as well. He just has a great look and vibe to him. So that's another guy that I think would have a chance at maybe getting called up before Basallo, simply because the Orioles just don't want to mess with Basallo's development because of how great of a prospect this kid is. Now, either way, again, he's an A-plus prospect, and he's going to have, I believe, what it takes to become an elite player in the major leagues. I'm looking at it similar to like Victor Martinez, even as crazy as a Miguel Cabrera, potentially, a Salvador Perez. I was reading one article where he was getting a lot of comparisons to one of the top prospects also in baseball, Jack Caglione. He's a Royals prospect, and he's not a catcher, but just the hitting profile of Jack Caglione is insane, because that's a very, very, very elite hitting profile, batter profile. So I'm beyond excited about Sam Basallo. And Hyde has talked about how intriguing the idea to have his bat in this lineup is, especially tweaking or throwing out the idea of having Basallo play first base, which he's accustomed to, and having Adley at catcher, and having both in the lineup at the same time, and talking about how intriguing that is. Really, more than anyone, I believe Ryan O'Hearn is blocking Sam Basallo's spot. Because then, again, the left-handed hitting first baseman would kind of fall into there. We know Adley's a switch hitter, so Adley doesn't necessarily need off against righties, even though, as we're going to touch on in a little bit, he did struggle, and maybe there might be something coming. It wouldn't be positive. I'm hoping Adley can get it back, but it might be a reason why we need Basallo quicker, is if Adley continues to struggle against right-handed pitching. Because then you can run that catcher platoon more while also utilizing some of them at DH or first base or wherever else. So, obviously, it's a little bit down the road. I don't expect Sam Basallo to really compete for a roster spot at pretty much any point this season, gang. But I think you fast forward a year from now, 2026, I'd almost say that Sam Basallo is a lock to leave Orioles camp on the roster. I do. I really, truly do. Now, throughout this whole episode, I've been mentioning names like Basallo, like Mayo, like multiple guys that are fighting for a spot or a fringe breaking camp guy. But really, I don't see the spot for any of these guys. And that's kind of, we touched on it last episode when we said that the roster is essentially set. And we ran through the 26-man roster that we pretty much felt was set in stone. And, you know, there's a couple spots that maybe not. But they are very few and far between. Now, as far as guys fighting for a spot, a fringe guy trying to do everything he can to prove he deserves on the roster, this is kind of the list of guys that I came up with. You got Cade Povich, who we talked about. Stud. And really seems to only be continuing to take those steps forward. And a guy we're going to touch on a little later this episode. You got Brandon Young, who we also talked on. And I don't think he really breaks camp, but I also think he's one of those first guys up, whether it be a probably reliever, but even maybe a starting spot. We got to see how the Orioles want to manage him as far as stretching out his arm as a starter or letting him go in the bullpen. That I'm not positive with. I want to say maybe they're leaning towards a starter at the moment. Rodolfo Martinez, obviously we touched on. Brian Baker is a guy who's pitched pretty decent for us and has shown good stuff this camp from everything I hear. He's a guy that right now is outside of that 26 that I think more than maybe anyone on this list has a chance at breaking camp with the team. You got Colin Selby, who also is maybe in that camp as one of the top guys, fringe guys to break camp with the team. And certainly I believe right in that conversation with Brandon Young and Rodolfo Martinez and Brian Baker himself to be that first guy up if they need somebody to come up. Then you get Coby Mayo, as we talked about. I just don't see the playing time for him right now. And I don't think he's versatile enough to help the Orioles to be just their primary backup infielder. Certainly he can't play second or short. Probably could play second if we needed him to in a pinch, but I don't know if he's ever spent time there. So Coby Mayo, I just don't see the room. Again, the 2 first basemen and all of these reasons why he'll be up at some point when a spot opens. But to say that he's going to get the spot over Ramon Urias as that backup outfield or infielder, I just don't see it. Ramon's more versatile, and certainly they don't want Coby Mayo to just sit on the bench. So they'd rather put Mayo back in AAA and have him get his at-bats every day rather than force him on the Major League roster to kind of handcuff you a little more with the utility to not play all that much. You got Nick Gordon. He has Major League blood in him, but also I just don't see the path again to him. He's certainly more versatile. He could even probably play in the outfield, certainly can play in the infield. But I don't know. But as far as infielders go, there's a few of these guys. Truly, Coby Mayo and Nick Gordon, like we said, but Terrin Vavra is back in the system. Certainly a guy that we've seen the Orioles brass liking over the past couple years. We had lost him last year, brought him back this offseason. I don't think he makes the roster over the talent that's on this Major League roster. But again, they like him. And another guy they like is Emmanuel Rivera. Certainly had that spark at times for the Orioles in the majors last year. And has started off camp hot. So, and then you got Levon Soto and Jeremiah Jackson also, along with Vermeil Machine. So all of those guys the Orioles like and find reasons to like and have found ways to go and acquire and bring in. And, like a couple of these guys like Soto, the Orioles had brought in somebody and Soto became available, and then they dropped that guy that they had just brought in to bring in Soto. So clearly, they like some of these guys. If I were to say who has the best shot at making the roster and unseating Ramon Urias, let's say, because outside of an injury, I don't see any way Westy and Gunnar and O'Hearn and Mountcastle aren't on the roster. Jackson, you could make the argument if he truly struggles this spring, they don't bring him up and they give second base to somebody else. Heck, maybe they give second base to Westberg and have Mayo up. That's a possibility. But ultimately, I think Ramon Urias is the most likely to find himself on the outs if any of these guys make that push. And if I had to ballpark it, I would say Coby Mayo, but only if Jackson Holiday doesn't make the roster. So if it's Mayo instead of Holiday. And so if we're talking to unseat Urias, I would say Rivera. And then probably Soto. Followed by maybe a toss-up with Vavra and Gordon. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. As far as the outfield goes, there's 4 guys really fringe-worthy. But Dylan Carlson, who we talked on last episode, is really the only guy that is, to me, able to break through from the top outfield group. Similar to Jackson, I could make the case if Heston Kjerstad struggles mightily this spring, they start him in AAA. But that's the only guy, again, outside of injury, that I could see not being on the major league roster. So then at that point, it's Dylan Carlson or Daz Cameron, who we talked about. Then you got Jordan Abrams and Franklin Barreto, two guys that we got from the Angels system. I don't really see a chance either one makes a run at the roster. Personally, I think, again, Carlson is in that group alone. Excuse me. His soda gets me bubbly. Dylan Carlson's the only one kind of at that next fringe level, and Daz Cameron's a step behind him. Other than that, I really think the roster is completely set. And I wouldn't be surprised if nobody on that list that I just said makes the major league roster out of camp. Because that's just how kind of set I think the Orioles roster is, aside from if there's an injury at any point this spring. Which hopefully there's not. Hopefully there's not. All right, so let's get to some pitchers. We're going to talk some pitching for the next few segments, okay? And Tomoyuki Sugano. I'm really struggling with that last name, guys. I need to hear it in games. I need to hear announcers say it before my brain catches up. Tomoyuki Sugano. I think I nailed it. Okay, 35-year-old. We know Orioles bring him in from Japan. We touched on him last episode in that bring-in and how much I liked the move. Well, so far, we're getting rave reviews out of Orioles camp. He hasn't pitched in a game yet. That should come soon. But every bullpen session he's had or live BP he's had, we're hearing great things, gang. Gary Sanchez caught one of his bullpens and was praising not only the stuff, but really the control. Made him say whoa a few times during the session. He even made a comment one time. I didn't know what the comment was, but he made a comment one time to some of the coaches and got them chuckling, especially over the splitter that he was seeing. And again, the control in the bullpen, he really praised him for that low fastball and was talking about how he could have closed his eyes and that ball would have wound up in his mitt. All right, so Sugano seems like he's everything that he was advertised. And that's exciting. That's very exciting. Again, you saw, I'll bring it up again from last episode, how successful Shota Imanga was last year for the Cubs. And he wasn't the most talked about Japanese pitcher coming overseas last year. And he pitched much better than Yamamoto. Now, maybe Sasaki pitches much better than Tomo. I don't know. All I'm saying is I think Tomo could put together a great year. We've heard pitching coach Drew French talk about that he loved what he saw. It was good sign to find out, I think it's a good sign that Drew French wants to find out how to say good job in Japanese. That to me means that he feels like he's going to have to say good job a lot to this guy. And that's what you want to hear. Tomo's got 6 pitches that he can control in any part of the zone. And talk about Drew French's comments. He graded him having an 80 command. Again, 20 through 80 is the MLB grading system, gang. So that's as good as it gets. Backs up what Gary Sanchez was talking about. And it's refreshing because we've seen some of our starters especially have problems controlling pitches sometimes. And not only is it going to be great to see Tomo be able to execute and his command on that kind of level, you have to believe that it's going to have a rub-off effect on guys like Povich and some of these other young pitchers, Gray Rod, who knows, maybe even some of the veterans like Eflin. It's very exciting. And Tomo was talking about how excited he personally is to have to make the adjustments he's going to have to make to succeed in the majors. That's just such a professional thing to hear. A guy understanding that he's had this very successful professional career, now in a different league, but still very successful professional career. And not coming over here going, I'm going to do what I've always done and I think I'll be successful. Going, there's probably some things that I've done that aren't going to succeed in this league. And I'm excited to take that opportunity to improve myself in a way where I'm going to succeed in this league as well. It's refreshing. It's great to hear. And talk about the rub-off effect on some of the younger pitchers. I think it all is going to have a positive effect, not just on the field, not just statistically for Tomo this year, but ultimately have a ripple of positive effects down the line for Orioles pitchers, not just this season, but for their careers. Truly, don't be surprised if one of these Orioles pitchers, whether it be Grayrod or Povich or McDermott, wind up spending time and in 10, 12 years when they're retiring, talking about how it's because of Tomo and the year or two they spent together that really helped mold the pitcher that they became. Don't be shocked, gang. Now, you want to talk about guys coming in with a professional attitude. We're going to talk about Cade Slim Povich, or as we're calling him on this episode, Provich. Okay? Because he's having a strong spring to start. Had a strong spring debut like we talked about. Great. Now, it is a tough road to make the team right now out of camp. Again, that's something we've talked about. But ultimately, he has as good of a chance as any of those fringe guys we listed to make this team. And certainly, there's going to become a time where we need an extra starter or two in this major league club. Cade Povich is going to be one of those names. He's talking this year in camp about how he's a lot less anxious, a lot more calmer, and more confident. And not only confident to himself, but it's like this aura of confidence around him. After one of his bullpens that he was getting praised for, he was talking to Drew French and some of the coaches and was exclaiming, "Hell yeah," all excited about how good that bullpen was. Now, if we look back to last year's numbers, he had an ERA of 5.2 through his 16 starts. Not amazing, certainly not complete liability for a young pitcher especially, but not necessarily what you want to see in that many starts. But he really, when you examine it more, got better as it went. In his 5 September starts, he had an ERA of 2.6. In fact, he allowed 2 runs or fewer in 4 of those 5 September starts. And the talk about Cade Povich, who again, his nickname is Slim, because he's slender, he's tall, he's thin. Well, not as thin. To quote Brandon Hyde, he's put some good size on. He looks physically different. Looks like he's walking around here with a lot of confidence. Again, he's got that aura of confidence. Last year, Cade was talking about how last year, when he was in camp, it was more about finding ways to make the ball club. This year, it's more about finding ways to be better when you're in the majors, because he knows he's going to be in the majors. He's already gotten being in the majors out of the way. So it's very exciting stuff. He's also made some minor adjustments to some pitches this offseason, but primarily he focused on things like sequencing, game planning, and the mental side of the game, which for a pitcher, especially more of a finesse pitcher like Cade Povich, is a huge, huge positive to have in your game, to feel comfortable about in your game. So a lot of big things, I think, coming from Cade Povich. And I think that's what he is. He's a pro now, and he's feeling like one. He's feeling like a guy that belongs, which is great when these young guys mentally break through that kind of hurdle from like, wow, I can't believe I'm here, to, yeah, I'm here. I deserve to be here. And I'm going to show you why. Hopefully he continues putting up some big spring numbers. And who knows, maybe he finds himself in the Orioles starting rotation come opening day. If not, again, I don't think it's going to take long for a spot to open up at some point that Cade Povich can come in and fill. Now, when we're talking the rotation, obviously it's easy to get enamored with guys like Povich and Tomo and even Morton because it's a lot of new. Well, Grayrod is still fairly new, gang. Okay? He's only about to go on to his third major league season, and his first two have been a little rocky at times. Ups and downs, very highs, very lows. The early reports, though, are that he came in great shape. And more than that is he's welcoming the challenge of stepping into that bigger role, filling the shoes of the ace that we lost in Corbin Burnes. Now, I know a lot of people are going to put more on Zach Eflin and even Charlie Morton as far as maybe being that ace early. I don't think it's going to take much time for people to realize Grayrod is the ace of this staff. Because when he's healthy, he's shown consistent improvement each time. Really, each time out. This offseason, he mainly focused on establishing his breaking ball and limiting the home runs. So, we know he's got a very good fastball. Maybe not total top-notch elite fastball, but certainly mid to high fastball. Very good fastball. His changeup is excellent. Absolutely great. It finished second in run value per 100 pitches. I believe that was last year. And just shows you that he has the secondary pitch to go with that fastball. So, again, he's working on establishing that breaking ball. For him, it's a slider, and he really needs to find more success with it because it's really his strikeout pitch. And he's a bit of a strikeout pitcher. So, when you dig into the slider, right, he's given up a batting average of 250 and a slugging of 563. Not, again, unbelievably bad, but certainly not positive, not good, okay? And more importantly, he needs to be better against right-handed pitching. He somewhat has this reverse split. You know, typically you would say righties have more success against righties and less success against lefties. Again, it's reverse for Grayrod, at least at the moment. Right-handed batters are batting 280 against him, whereas left-handed batters are batting 205. And right-handed batters had an OPS of nearly 200 points higher than those left-handed batters. So he's been really good against lefties. I believe that goes to show you how great the fastball changeup combo is. Because when you're facing the lefties, that changeup tails off away from them, and that's kind of where you get the swing and misses and all of that. Whereas the righties, it kind of dives into their barrel. So that's why you need that slider to break the other way, to break away from the righties. So that's why this slider really needs to be better, okay? Because that ultimately is going to directly correlate to better numbers against right-handed batters. Now, home runs isn't necessarily a liability when it comes to Grayson Rodriguez, but his career average is slightly above average, okay? Now, the number I'm about to say, you're going to be like, sounds pretty dead on to average, which the Major League average, the home runs per 9, is 1.14. Grayrod's sitting at 1.17. Again, pretty much dead average and not a complete liability, but certainly it could show signs of maybe getting worse. And I say that because since we're bringing in the left field wall, and he's shown that he's worse against right-handed hitters, that essentially will just correlate to at least a few more home runs leaving the ballpark. If you don't improve on the slider and getting right-handers out, which correlate exactly. So that's why there's some worry about maybe that home run number having a chance to go up, and why they're focusing so much on making sure that they limit the home runs that he gives up. Now, when you dig into his numbers, you see that he's really showing the ability to go deeper into games, which is a great sign. In 11 of his 20 starts last year, he got a quality start. So that just shows you, gang, that when he starts, he's getting a quality start more often than not. And again, he's showing signs of improvement, which means that 11 of 20 could turn into 14 of 20. And hopefully there's a lot more than 20 starts. But he's never made more than 14 consecutive starts without going on the IL or getting demoted, which worries you a bit. And while there isn't the injury-prone tag on him at the moment, because he's a big guy and a hard thrower, sometimes those guys can't handle, the course of a whole season and tend to be more injury-prone. And we've seen him get injured the past few seasons, which basically just leads me to be like, well, it's important that he stays healthy this season, or else we're all going to look at him as being injury prone. And that's the last thing we want, because when he's healthy, he's dominant. And if he stays healthy, he's going to be an ace. And currently he's an ace in the making that just needs to stay healthy, gang. If he hits 30 starts and give or take 175 innings pitched, I don't see any way the production isn't at least of a solid number 2, if not ace status. So exciting things for Grayson. Now we got to hold our breath a bit. Hope he doesn't get hurt. Hope he stays healthy like he is right now. But again, came in great shape. Really seems in good spirits, good mindset. Seems strong. Hopefully it all comes together this year. And he's able to stay healthy. And he's able to have the best season of his career thus far. Now, we're going to talk about Adley Rutschman bouncing back, because I think it's not a foregone conclusion, but all signs are pointing towards Adley bouncing back and becoming the player that he was for pretty much his whole career, other than the very beginning and the second half of last season. Now, when we view the second half of last season, which we all know he struggled in, but when you really look into it, there were certain reasons for it. He really struggled with the fastball. He struggled against right-handed pitchers. He had a higher whiff rate and a higher K rate than he typically has ever had. Now, neither of those two metrics were horrible. It's not like he went from being one of the best to one of the worst. No, he went from being in like the 95th percentile to the 83rd percentile sort of thing. So, again, there's no real signs as to throw up huge caution flags and be truly concerned that the second half of last year is the Adley we're getting moving forward. Instead, I think there's a lot more signs that show that's not the Adley Rutschman that we're going to typically get. In fact, there's a great quote from new hitting coach Cody Ashe that I'm going to get to in a second, but that'll say that. But before we get to that, when you look at Rutschman, it seemed like he was too in his head, and he couldn't balance the idea of patience with pressing, right? Because we know he's a very patient hitter. And that's going to be him pretty much his whole career, I think. That's just who he is, and I love that about him. I think that's how a lot of hitters are successful, is with patience at the plate. But ultimately, you need to have that aggressiveness, and it's tough to know when to balance it and how to balance it when you're pressing like him and a lot of these Orioles were in the second half of last season. Seemed like maybe he was trying to get a little too power happy at the second half of last year. That's possible as well. So we'll see how he bounces back from that. But everything we've heard from him is how much that has fueled him and motivated him. Not just his personal lack of success in the second half, but the team's lack of success, especially in the postseason. And how you stew on that for weeks and months, and it drives you mad. But in a positive way, it seems like, which is a great thing to hear. He certainly worked very hard this season, not just offensively, but defensively, continuing to try and improve his game from all aspects, which is admirable because he's constantly viewed as one of not only the best catchers hitting, but defensively. So it would have been very easy for him to go into this offseason going, hey, I got defense on lock. let me just focus on getting that hitting back. But again, sometimes that's pressing too much. I think Adley is smart enough and chill enough to understand I got to focus on all of it. And I wasn't perfect defensively last year either. There are areas I can work on and be better. And frankly, I feel he can be better defensively than he was last year, despite the fact that he had great defensive metrics. I really do believe there are times when he could be better or he could frame better. So hopefully, everything he worked on this offseason continues to just propel him forward into becoming the best Adley rushman we've ever seen. He also showed up in tremendous shape. It's something we mentioned last episode, but you just see a picture of him and you're like, man, he's in good shape this year. Not that he's been in bad shape any of these years, but truly, you just see this frame on him and you get excited. Not in that way, gang. You just get excited about how strong he is at this point in the season and how good he's going to be this year, I believe. Seems like he's in a great mindset. He really reset his mental after last year's failures, which is what you have to do. You let it motivate you, but you don't let it weigh you down. So I fully expect Adley to bounce back to his perennial all-star level and really lead from the front. Be that captain, be that leader that we all know he is and we all believe he is. I'm excited. So to get to that Cody Ashley quote, he said, quote, last year is the exception, not the rule, to what his career is going to look like. So I fully believe that as well. That was a down year. It was a tough year. Everybody has those from time to time. Not everything's going to be completely linear. But I fully believe that negative play, that tough, bad play, was the exception, not the rule. The rule is that he's very good, and he's going to remain very good. He's only going to continue getting better from here on out. So while he hasn't played in his spring game yet, he may have been in line to start today. I'm not sure. I don't see anything negative as to why he hasn't started these first two games. I really just think it's the Orioles being excited to see what they have in Sanchez and Basallo, who started the first two games. And then once you get past the starters, you're not going to put Rushman in at that point. You're going to put in the Banuelos and the other Ardoin and the other catchers, Headley. So expect to see Adley in a game soon, spring game soon. Again, he might play today if it didn't get rained out. Maybe tomorrow he winds up getting the start. Either way, I haven't heard any reason as to why he hasn't played in the game yet. So now we're going to wrap up the episode talking a little Kyle Bradish. And Bradish dreaming. Listen, we know that he's still rehabbing from his Tommy John surgery. And if you look out there and see people talking or articles, it may seem like he was not going to return at all, which is possible. But I have some hope that there is a chance he returns this year. And I think that the more we hear from Mike Elias and the more we kind of feel it out, it kind of seems like there's a chance we may see Kyle Bradish in the back half of this year. Now, certainly it won't be until the All-Star break minimum. Mike Elias said that. Quote, it's definitely the second half. That's my expectation at this point. But even the fact that he said it's his expectation that it's definitely the second half shows me a lot of confidence that Mike Elias has that Kyle Bradish is going to work himself back into the starting rotation this season. Now, Bradish has talked about in hindsight how he wished he would have gotten the surgery last January, but how it was one of these things where it didn't feel that bad at the time, and you didn't know how it was going to react. They weren't sure if he was going to be able to pitch on it or not. Certainly, they gave him some time off before bringing him and John Means back at the same time, pretty much. Bradish ended up pitching for 6 weeks, but talked about how, again, while it didn't feel that bad in January when they found it, he was dealing with significant pain by the end of it. And his last start was actually against the Phillies. And he talked about how after that start, he knew he just couldn't do it anymore. So he had to get the surgery. Now, last year, we heard similar things about Batista at this time. We knew he had gotten Tommy John surgery last year. We knew that he would not be back for at least the first half of this season. And there was even maybe some optimistic quotes that we were reading into. Like the one I just read that Mike Elias said about Kyle Bradish. That maybe gave us hope that we would see Felix Bautista at some point last year. And we didn't. They held him out the whole time. They considered bringing him back towards the very end, but ultimately wound up being precautious. Okay? But I think there's some differences as far as I can see. At least one big difference as far as Bradish and Batista. And that is that Felix didn't get that surgery till the end of the season. Okay? Now, that was 2 years ago, but the point is that, remember, the Orioles kind of held him out for a month or two, somewhat rehabbing, trying some placid injections or whatever, to try and get him back without the surgery. And then once it ultimately was deemed that he couldn't come back for the postseason, they shut him down and had the surgery at the end of the season. Bradish, though, got his surgery as soon as he got shut down last year in June. So that, if nothing more, buys an extra month or two, if not even 3, of time in between Bautista and Bradish. And if the Orioles last year were considering bringing Bautista back in September, October, about a year out, well, now, if you peg that this year in September, let's call it, Bradish will be over a year out. A year and a couple months out. Now, I believe that the 16-month kind of number has been thrown out to where that's really where you start feeling yourself again. But again, that's just a general thing as far as Tommy John goes. It's not the rule. Again, it might be the go-to standard, but there's no saying that after 13, 14 months, you're not really still feeling very good. So it really gives me hope that maybe after the break or even down the stretch, we could see Kyle Bradish come back. Now, certainly as a starter, you're going to have to ramp up to that point, which means there's going to have to be rehab starts. And before the rehab starts, you're going to have to be, doing the rehab assignments. And it's going to take some time to work the arm back. So that's kind of, while also a difference with Batista, kind of negative to Bradish coming back. The idea that maybe the Orioles do see the pathway, but they're like, by the time we ramp him all the way up, there's only like a week left, and then we're going into the playoffs. And do we really want him coming right back into the playoffs? Maybe not. I don't know. I love Kyle Bradish. And last year when he came back, he was pitching lights out and electric. But we'll see. We'll see kind of not only where his health is, that's the main concern, if they can pull it off health-wise without putting him at risk. Because we've seen the Orioles tend to lean into precaution when it comes to these rehabbing players. But also, we'll see where the Orioles are at that point. Because I could make the argument, as great as Bradish is, and I love him, he's a Cy Young candidate when he's healthy for us. If all goes according to plan with this pitching staff, you might already have 4 really solid starters in Grayrod, in Eflin, in Morden, and in Tomo. And heck, you might even be bringing in somebody at the deadline and adding another starter. We talked about how Dean Kramer is actually set up to take that next step and potentially become a solid 3 around the league, let's call it. There's some idea that maybe the Orioles aren't really in a position to where they need to force Kyle Bradish back. Heck, maybe Cade Povich came up and performed really well. Maybe Brandon Young is surprising people and pitch really well. So there's a lot of different scenarios, and we're a long time out from it. But I can't help but dream a little about the idea of Kyle Bradish coming back around July, August of next year. Or this year, excuse me. And it's exciting. It's exciting at the possibility that we could add that basically it would be almost a trade deadline addition from inside, just from somebody getting healthy and getting activated off the IL. And especially when you're talking about a guy who's an ace and a Cy Young candidate when healthy. It's exciting stuff to dream and believe that maybe that's the chance. Maybe that's the deadline addition as far as at least the starting rotation goes that we need to take us over the edge and really compete for the World Series game. Because ultimately, as much as I love these winning seasons and I love making the playoffs, we need to win playoff games. We need to win playoff series. And I want so badly to see an Orioles World Series championship. And it's possible. And so that's why we're here, talking Orioles baseball, because of how much I love this team and how much I want to see them in the World Series. So we're going to wrap it up in a second. I have just one quick note of fun that I want to mention, that the Orioles are doing something great with this value menu. And I just want to give them kudos, give them credit. You've seen some teams all over sports start doing this value menu, try and save the fans some money when they come to the ballpark. And I love it because some of these prices have gotten outrageous, gang. And sometimes you stand in line for this food and you get, a normal amount of ballpark food and it's like $70. And you're like, what did I even get? A sandwich we each got a sandwich and a beer? So it's nice to see that there's an idea that you can get a ton of food and barely break the bank, okay? So the value menu at Oriole Park now is going to have $4 hot dogs, $4 pretzel bites. You can do it either with cheese or a cinnamon pretzel with icing. Oh, I'm going to get some of those. I love those. Nachos with cheese, refillable sodas, which, like the movie theater or something, love that. Love that refillable soda idea. Amazing. I wish they did it for the beer, but they don't, and I understand why. Also, $4 waters. Talking about beers, you get a 12-ounce beer for $5. Great deal. Can't tell you the last time I bought a beer at any sports game for $5. Maybe never. A hard seltzer, $6. Okay. Desserts, $3. You got popcorn for $3.50 and peanuts for $2.50. Count me in, gang. Count me in. I'm excited. I cannot wait to be at opening day. I will be there. Thank you, Jane and John, our good friends, for taking us yet again to opening day this year. So excited to get down there. So excited for opening day, but we got a lot more spring training ahead of us. So this was Monday's episode. We will see you Thursday, gang. I cannot wait to watch more Baltimore Orioles baseball and talk about it right here with you. So till next time, gang, let's go.